Welcome to Youth Corner. I'm Ibrahim Rahman. This is the friendly chat show for the youth, a place to talk about what you do, recognise your achievements, share your experiences and inspiring stories, and discuss topics that matter to you. Now, we've got another fantastic guest here with me today. Joining me is a heritage professional from East London. She has worked at the Museum of London and more recently, the Imperial War Museums. Joining me today, let's give a warm welcome to Halima Khanom. Welcome to Youth Corner, Halima.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, not a problem. How are you today?
Really well, thank you.
Fantastic. Now, I have to ask this question. I think I can guess what your favourite movie is just by hearing, just by listening to that introduction that I just gave. Can I have a guess what it might be?
Yeah, what's my favourite movie?
I was going to say Night at the Museum.
No, I've actually not watched it.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and wrong museum, Ibrahim. That's at the Natural History Museum.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. But anyway, there is another show that reviews movies, but it's not this one, so we'll move on. So let's move the jokes to one side, because that obviously wasn't a very good joke. So tell us about your background. What do you do? And because obviously you've worked in lots of museums, and you call yourself a heritage professional. So what does that mean?
Sure. So heritage is about the contemporary uses of history, how we use history in the present day to think about our past. That sounds really jargony, but I think it's very important in thinking about where we come from and what we're doing now and how we go forward. And that's the sort of thing that I try to keep in touch with when I'm working in museums and with any heritage collection. It's all about connecting people with objects from the past and thinking about that journey.
Fantastic. So when did your interest in museums begin? Because what was it that made you want to work in museums and the heritage sector? What really drew you into that?
I've always had a real interest in history since I was very young. I just loved escaping into sort of stories about the past. I guess about people conquering different areas and lands and basically why we are here. My dad talked about our history a lot. Our family's originally from Bangladesh. My dad's always sort of connecting me to his story of coming to East London in the 1970s and settling here. I think that's really sort of nurtured a real love for history.
It's something that really fascinated you then, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it, and all of my work is about, I guess, getting other people to feel that way about their own history.
Fantastic. So tell me a bit more about what you do in a museum then, because from the outside it looks like, well, it's kind of difficult to tell from the outside really. So, can you give us a sort of behind the scenes sort of idea of what goes on in the world of museums?
Sure. I mean, I can imagine for someone from the outside it looks like a big box of old things, probably lost a lot of dust. Gathering in corners, but it's a lot more exciting than that.
It must be a lot more interactive nowadays, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a very sort of Victorian 18th century idea of what museums used to be. All of my work is centered around engaging young people in history and heritage and getting them passionate about historical topics. A lot of my work, I like to focus on the history of migration in the UK and really get young people today, especially from non-white or BME backgrounds, to connect to why they are here. I think that's a story that's not transferred very well all the time, partly because of the curriculum not covering these topics, but also because of kids not being able to talk to their parents in the same way as maybe. So I feel that museums, or the work I do, sort of covers that.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, would you say you've enjoyed the roles that you've had so far?
I've loved it. I mean, I can't express to you how rewarding it is to really get people to connect to these stories. Sometimes it's not even their story. Sometimes it's about someone who is from an English background, living in East London all his life, and he never knew that his neighbour, who is, I don't know, from a Bangladeshi background, had this story. And then it's about them sharing those stories and learning a little bit more about each other and each other's history. So maybe they both had fathers who worked in factories, and they connect on that. And it's about those little moments that I think make it very rewarding.
Because nowadays, I mean, with technology being used so widely, I mean, that plays a really important role nowadays with especially if you're looking at the heritage sector as well, that must play a very important role now, especially with the work that you've been doing.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I am all about using new media to engage the younger audiences in history. I guess when people talk about history in school settings, young people instantly switch off. I know that it took me a while to get onto the history.
Yeah, they probably still use textbooks, not things like this, like
well,
tablets and things.
Let's not knock textbooks.
No, textbooks are great. No, I love reading.
Books are still there and they're still important. But I think, what did my history teacher say when they were trying to get us to consider history GCSE? I think we were listing the people who've done a history degree, and it went from people like Ali G to I think Tony Blair studied history at once, and most people would have studied history at once. And I think basically to do any sort of profession, you need to know how society has progressed and why we are the way we are now to be able to go beyond now, isn't it?
Absolutely. And while we're on the subject of history, that is obviously a subject that you studied yourself as well, isn't it? Because
yes.
You did that at Goldsmiths, isn't it? You went to Goldsmiths, University of London, you did history and politics.
Yes, that's correct. I've been studying history, since GCSE level, really. I pursued it at A-level as well, at A2 as well. And that's correct, I did a 3-year programme at Goldsmiths studying history and politics, so it was a joint honours.
Right, so did you enjoy the course, and what did you learn from the course as well?
It was absolutely amazing. Goldsmiths opened so many doors for me. I was able to explore the sorts of histories that I've never come across in my younger years. In your earlier sort of studies, when you're at GCSE or A-level, you're chronicling. You learn about Henry VIII and his 6 wives. You learn about Nazi Germany, Second World War, First World War. You get to Goldsmiths and you realise there's a history of the British Empire, and from an Indian perspective, or a history of Africa, or of course these histories exist, but unless you're given access to these early age, you might be quite ignorant of them. And that goes back to my original point about why it's so important for people from Bangladeshi or Afro-Caribbean backgrounds to know these histories of why they are here. Otherwise they feel a bit dislocated.
Definitely. So it really does open your eyes, doesn't it? It really opens a lot of doors and gives you those opportunities to look into areas that perhaps, as you just mentioned, you wouldn't get the opportunity elsewhere.
Absolutely.
So that's really interesting to know that. So I also want to ask, was it true that a member of the royal family also graduated alongside you?
That's right.
Who was it then? Which member of the royal family was it?
I'm sworn to secrecy. It was Beatrice.
Wow, that's fantastic. So she was actually in your year group, is that right?
Yes, she was. I think there was a lot of us bunked from different programs into the same classes.
Right.
So I was doing history and politics. I had friends who were doing just straight history. I think she was doing history of ideas, I believe. I can't recall really.
Fantastic. Did you ever get to meet her though?
Of course, we were in classes together.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. That's brilliant. Well, it's not every day you get to graduate alongside quite a prominent figure, I guess, or a celebrity.
I do believe the members of the royal family were at our graduation, yes.
Wow, that's very interesting indeed. So anyway, so you graduated from Goldsmiths and then you moved on to the University of London where you took a Master's in Heritage Studies, is that right?
I actually took a bit of a gap in between. I really wanted to it's great studying and I loved it so much, but I really wanted to throw myself into the world of work and find my feet there.
Okay.
So I took a year out. I actually got some experience in the heritage sector, working with collections and learning firsthand what it means to do history in practice, which was fantastic. And that just really spurred me on to study at a higher level. So I was very fortunate to have done my master's programme, MA in Heritage Studies at the University of East London.
Sure. So why did you particularly choose to study heritage? So was it just because it was an area of interest, or and because that's the thing when you do a master's, when you go into further education, you can choose a specialist subject. So was that the one that really stood out for you, or were there other subjects that perhaps you were considering as well?
That's a good question. I was looking at loads of different programs. Working in sort of heritage cultural sector, you could go loads of different go through lots of different pathways. Unfortunately, I think universities turned into a bit of a business, and it really is what master sounds sexy. So I really wanted to look carefully at my options, because 10 grand isn't, it doesn't grow on trees. And I looked at cultural studies and museum studies and so on. But I was very lucky to come across an opportunity at the Museum of London, where it was a funded opportunity in a heritage studies program at the University of East London. So in effect, they picked that program for me. But in another respect, it was the best program I could have come across. All the other programs that I saw, cultural studies, museum studies, they were too focused in some ways. Heritage encompasses everything, in that you're looking at the heritage of green spaces, the heritage of, these very spaces that have come into being in East London. So it interrogates a lot more subject matter in a way than just focusing on museums. So it means that I could go in and out of lots of different fields using that degree in a way that I can't with museum studies or something focusing on, I don't know, how to become a music producer, which
Wow.
is some of the programs that are out there right now.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, so overall, I mean, University of London compared to Goldsmiths, would you say that they're completely different experiences, or do you see some similarities in terms of how your studies went there?
I think the main difference from any undergraduate to master's level is the sheer depth of what you're learning. The subject matter just...
There's a lot more research as well. I mean, I suppose you expect that the further you go up.
It is a lot more research. It's I can't quite... How do I articulate it? It's just a lot more in depth. I could have easily, every sort of week of lectures that I did, I could have easily done a PhD on each one.
Wow.
That's how that's how meaty these subjects are.
Sure.
A master's is almost an introduction to it. But what I loved about master's level was my course mates. Everyone was a mature student. I was learning so much from them. We were in classes of about 5 to 7 of us. It was a lot more, grown up than when we were doing our undergraduate degree. And our lecturers and us, we were, equals. We were all discussing things. You felt like your points were just being taken very seriously. And it's a lot more independent. You have to push yourself a lot more. You don't have lecturers telling you what your ideas are. You have to really push your sense of...
They really test your
ideas.
imagination, don't they? They expect, you're very much independent and you're driven. You have to be driven, don't you?
Yeah, and finding your own feet and finding your own space within these theories and things that they're throwing at you. They could say what they think about it, but you really need to be ready to say what you're thinking about it. It's not like an undergraduate degree where you could string together what this person and that person said. It really is, what do you think? What do you think about what they're saying?
And I guess that's what's really helped you in your career as well, in terms of how you interpret things and how you interpret information as well. Because looking at your work in the heritage sector as well, you've done quite a lot of other projects as well. You've been involved in lots of initiatives, like Everyday Muslim as well, which I thought was quite interesting to tap into. So what is Everyday Muslim all about?
Sure. So, yeah, absolutely. I like to keep busy. I like to do lots of different projects. Everyday Muslim is initiative trying to create the first central archive dedicated to British Muslim history in the UK.
Right.
The first year when I first came into contact with the project was the project working with Bishopsgate Institute, trying to collect stories of Muslims arriving in the UK in the 60s and 70s, and basically trying to figure out how to live Muslim in the UK. What do you do when you arrive and there's no halal butchers? How do you source halal food? What do you do when your friend passes away? How do you conduct a funeral in the right way? How do you do Friday congregation prayers? How do you find a space big enough to hold that many men? There's a funny story that I always mention about how a group of young men, they were looking for a Friday congregation space for Jummah prayer, and I think the only space they found, this is in East London by the way, in the mid-60s, and the only space that they found was an empty swimming pool. So they all clamoured in and they held a Jummah prayer there. And that contrasts that to where we are sitting today, just a few meters away from the East London Mosque, and just think about how far we've come.
Yeah, certainly. Well, if you look at Tower Hamlets, for example, I mean, it's changed so rapidly. It's so different to obviously how it was about 50 years ago, isn't it? So
Absolutely, and still
massive change,
changing.
massive changes there, definitely. So what's been your input, particularly within this project?
I volunteer on it. I am quite passionate about the subject matter. My role is a bit of everything, really, whatever interests me. The project manager, Sadia, who is incredible in starting this initiative and keeping it going, is very sort of open to what I want to do. More recently, I hosted an event. I do take on a lot more of the public side of what Everyday Muslim gets up to. So I host a lot of events and organising it and programming it. So more recently, I did the What Matters event, which was an ongoing consultation between Everyday Muslim and members of the public about what sorts of histories we're supposed to be engaging with, where people see this project going, and whether we are going in the right direction. And the great thing is that this is an ongoing consultation, so anyone who feels passionate about British Muslim heritage can feed into this and really sort of shape the future of what this archive might look like. Do they see it encompassing arts and media? Should we be commissioning artists? Should we be looking for spaces for all of these archives to be held in? I mean, at the moment it's at Bishopsgate Institute, but do we need our own independent space? So we're very it's very collaborative and democratic in that way.
Wow, that's really interesting. So it seems like there is a goal that you want to essentially find your own museum space. So, but how far realistically do you think that is? And how far away do you think?
See, that goal has been articulated in one sense, but I think the question still remains, and it really is subject to what our stakeholders think.
And also the input of the public as well. How much do they want to contribute?
I mean, finding your own sort of space means your the way this history is held makes a statement about what British Muslim identity means today. Is it a separate thing that deserves its own space, or should it be a space within some of the museums that are already in existence today?
Within an existing space,
yeah. Which means, it's a bit more integrated. And I'm just throwing it out there. I don't have an answer.
Right, that's interesting. So it sounds like it's certainly going places then, and you've certainly been very involved with that, which is really exciting. So let's talk about your personal plans then for the future then. So this is obviously what you've done. You've worked at Museum London, you're working at the Imperial War Museums as well. So where do you see yourself further down the line, and what is your ultimate ambition?
Ultimate ambitions, wow. I think in the furthest sense, I've always seen myself as starting my own company,
right.
Basically arts creative company that works with young people but socially isolated people. I'm very passionate about people with mental health problems and people with learning disorders who aren't sort of engaged in the main spaces like museums sometimes, or at least the funding for that has been cut in recent years. I feel that that's something that I feel really passionate about, and if I don't see it happening more soon in museums, then I would like to address it outside of museums.
That's very interesting, yeah. So we are coming towards the end of the show now, but if we are to give some advice to the youth about those who are also interested in heritage, or those who perhaps you want to convince them to get into this sector, what kind of advice would you give them? What sort of things need to be on the CV? What kind of tips would you give them?
If you're interested in working with collections as a historian or as a budding historian, I think it's really important to just start with getting work experience with working with collections. If you want to work with, a sword from the Ottoman era, from the V&A collection, try and get in touch with the V&A, try and see what volunteering opportunities are going. I won't lie and say that it's not a competitive sector. It is a crazy competitive sector. There's people, there's an abundance of people who are trying to get into a sector, and what really stands out is sheer experience, and not just that, just fresh ideas, about how you're engaging audiences in this day and age. I think that goes a long way. I think that's what the young people today are able to offer in a way that dusty curators who've been working with dinosaur bones for 30 years aren't able to offer in the same way. So that's your edge, and think about it and go with it and throw your ideas out there.
Definitely. So you've got to have the passion for it. You've got to have the drive, and clearly got to be full of ideas for that. So it sounds very interesting indeed, and it's been really fascinating hearing about that, Halima. So once again, many thanks for joining me at Youth Corner today. It's been wonderful hearing about it, and I'm sure our viewers have enjoyed listening to that too. So thanks again.
Thank you.
On that note, we have come to the end of the show. So once again, thanks very much to Halima Khanom for joining me in the studio today. And also, if you'd like to join me at Youth Corner as well, if you want to be a guest on this show, get in touch. The email address is youthcorner@lb24.tv. And we've also got a brand new Facebook page as well. So check out www.facebook.com/Youth Corner Show. Until next time, I've been Ibrahim Rahman. It's goodbye for now.